Looking for a super fun last minute Christmas gift? Well, how about a handmade stocking? Your ScanNCut makes it easy to do. Hey, I'm Julie, Fei-Fan Balzer, and today I'm going to show you how. I'm going to draw a very rough sketch of a stocking. It's a pretty simple shape, right? It's just sort of a giant angled sock. And that's it. You don't have to be a great artist. Now you can fuss with it and make adjustments as much as you want, because remember, the scanner is only going to pick up the outside line. So like this is a curved line, this is a square line. Maybe I want to square it up. You know, if you want to change the angle, let's say, of this, like turn here so it's more gentle. You know, you can mess around with it as much as you want until you feel comfortable. Once you are, you're going to take your scanning mat and just insert your drawing right into it. Then we're going to load this into the machine and scan it. From the home screen, I'm going to choose Scan, Scan to Cut Data, and Start. I want to choose the first option, which is Outline Only. You can see it there. I'm catching some schmutz over here, so I'm just going to bring in the arrows to avoid that. And then hit Preview. And here is the outline. It looks pretty good. So I can do some smoothing if I want, if the line seems really jagged to me. That looks good. So I'm ready to say okay. Okay. Now let's save it into the machine. Okay. Let's go home. Still okay. And now it's time to work with our pattern. I'm going to choose Retrieve Data from the machine. It will be the file that we just saved, and I can see it here on the screen. Now I want to make sure that there are no stray marks. I'm going to go into Edit and see how this little red dot came up. That's a stray mark. So I can see that there's only two things here. One is a stray mark and one is my stocking pattern. So I want to get rid of the stray mark. So while it's highlighted red, I can just hit the trash can and say okay. And now I should just have this one pattern. That's it. There's nothing else here, which is perfect. So I do want to change the size of this, but first I want to change the cut area. I want this to be 12 by 24 because I want to make a big stocking. So I'm going to say okay. And now you can see this arrow comes, which means my mat is big. So now this allows me to resize my stocking piece and make it much larger. So I think I'm going to make mine maybe 16 inches high. That's sort of an arbitrary number that I picked. You can make yours as high as you would like it to be. So that makes the width 11.7, which is fine. And I can see there's the bottom of my stocking. So that looks great. And I can just keep hitting OK. If I want, I can save this resized image so that I never have to go through this resizing process again. So I can save it into the machine. And I can even overwrite the original file so that I don't have that file that has the weird extra mark in it. So I'm going to do that. And now I know I can go back and retrieve this anytime I want. So I'm going to say OK. Okay, again. I want to cut this. But first, we've got to unload our scanning mat and load in a cutting mat. I'm going to eject the scanning mat. And I have a 12 by 24 mat, which has high-tack fabric support sheets on it, which is making it possible for it to hold this fabric. So I'm going to go ahead and load that. I've also put into the blade holder, it's an auto blade, same as I always use, but I'm just using it's a dedicated fabric blade. Just I mark it so that I know, just like you have fabric and paper scissors, but it's the same exact blade. So once that's set, I'm going to go ahead and press start. The first of my stocking pieces is cut. Now, instead of having to flip this pattern, I'm going to put the next piece of fabric face down so it will just automatically be flipped. So because I cut this one face down, you can see with the one I originally cut, I now have two that go in the opposite directions so they can be the outside of the stocking without having to reverse the image. I was able to just flip my fabric. So I'm going to do the same thing with some lining fabric. So now you have your two outside pieces, your two lining pieces, and we need to make the cuff. And I like a big cuff, but first you need to figure out what the distance is from here to here. Mine looks like at its widest point, it's like 7 1/8, but I might just make it 7 and trim off a little bit of that excess. And then you can decide how high you want your cuff to be. And like I said, I like a big cuff. So I'm thinking like 4 1/2 would kind of be right. Remember to leave seam allowance. So if I want it to be 4, I need it to be 4 1/2. So I'm going to go ahead and head to the ScanNCut and ask it to cut a rectangle like that for me. So I'm going to say, okay, let's go home. It's okay to delete all patterns. And now I want to make a rectangle. So I'm going into the built-in shapes, and here is a rectangle. And I am going to make this, like we said, 4 1/2 high. Oops. And then you can see the width has been changing automatically because the aspect ratio button is on. So if I click this, now I can make this width exactly what I want it to be. So I can either make it sort of 7 1/8-ish, or I can just bring it down to 7 and trim off that little excess. Now I know I want 4 pieces, 2 for the inside of the cuff and 2 for the outside of the cuff, but I don't think that 4 are going to fit onto a 12 by 12 mat. So, but as long as I'm using the 12 by 24 mat, that should be fine. So I say set, and I still have the 12 by 24 mat on here, so you can see that that all looks great. Now, because I'm going to use 2 different fabrics, one of the things I might want to do is just bring one fabric down here. So these 2 pieces are going to come out of one fabric. And for this one, just make sure that these 2 pieces are going to come out of a different fabric. So now we're ready to go ahead and load the fabric onto our mat. I ended up using scraps of some leftover fabric I had, and then scraps of the fabric that I used for the outside of the stocking. So I need to scan in all these scraps to make sure that I'm going to be able to place my material exactly where I want it. So I'm going to load this into the machine, and then press the scan button and start. I can see my fabric on the screen. If it's too dark, I can use the settings tool and I can make it a little bit paler. So I need to rotate these rectangles to fit on these. So I'm going to go to Edit and Object Edit and use the Rotate button. 90 degrees on this one, 90 degrees on this one, and then drag them into place like so. And then if I scroll down, these look like they just need to be moved apart so that they fit on the fabric. So then it's okay, okay, okay again, still okay. Let's choose cut. And one quick note about blade choice. If you are cutting thin fabric thin like cotton quilting weight fabric that has no fusible, no stabilizer, nothing in it, you might consider using the thin fabric auto blade, which is the one with the gold top. Otherwise, I just use my regular blade, but again, a dedicated fabric blade. And start. And remove all of my cut rectangles. I have my stocking and my cuff piece, and I'm going to pin them right sides together, and I'm going to sew right along this seam. Don't worry if your stocking and your cuff don't match exactly. You want to get the gist of it, and then you know that the cuff line is straight, so use that as your stitch guide when you get to your sewing machine. And now I'm going to press this seam open with a hot iron, and I will repeat the process with all the cuff and stocking pieces. So you're going to take an outside and an inside, and you're going to go ahead and lay them right sides together. Make sure that the toes are pointing the same way. Then we're going to pin all along this edge, stitch along here, and repeat the same with the other two pieces where the toe faces the other way. I have stitched the two pieces together and pressed it with an iron. So now they're open. And I'm going to take the other side, matching right sides together so that I have my same fabric here and here. Then I'm going to go ahead and pin all the way around here. So I've pinned all around, but you need to leave an opening so that you can turn. So I'm going to double pin, and you can decide if you want to use a really big opening or a smaller one, whatever it is, but I'm going to put double pins here. So I just remind myself when I get there on the sewing machine to stop and not sew it completely 100% shut, or we'll never be able to turn it. The other thing is you'll notice that the double pinning is in the lining part of it, not in the finished side of it. So we'll be able to hide it really easily. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way around here, except for this gap. So you can see that I finished sewing around here, and I of course stopped where the pins are, so this is all open. Once you're ready, you can pull out the extra pins, and then we're going to open up this hole, and we're going to pull the whole thing through. So once you have turned it, you can iron or not, but you essentially want to pinch, and it should fold pretty naturally where the rest of the seams are, this shut, and we're going to top stitch this shut on the sewing machine. So when top stitching, I'm going to come onto the fabric, stitch, 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 and then go off the fabric. And of course, if you wanted to hide your top stitching, you could have just used a black thread. So I'm going to trim these threads, and then we'll be ready to turn the stocking again. So now it is time to stuff the lining into the stocking. Okay, so once you've stuffed the lining inside, you can fold down the cuff. And once you're satisfied that you have turned everything, you can go ahead and iron it or leave it as is, but this stocking is ready to hang and it looks absolutely fabulous. You can of course decorate it more if you wish, but I'm pretty happy with how my stocking turned out. Thanks so much for watching. For more tips, tricks, and tutorials, be sure to visit my blog at balzerdesigns.typepad.com, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and of course, don't forget about the ScanNCut website at ScanNCut.com.